I'm going to present and invite our first speaker, Professor Saket Anand, who's from IIIT Delhi. And he's an expert in computer vision. And over the past few years, he's also looking to apply it to important problems of wildlife conservation. So with that, I'll invite Saket.
First of all, I would like to thank Microsoft to give me the opportunity to talk to you all about something that is really close to my heart. I have been a fan of wildlife ever since I was a kid, but this opportunity is really something which brings in two things I'm really passionate about: computer vision and wildlife. So I'm going to this is going to be largely a non-technical talk, and we had two wonderful sessions in the first half where there were details of models and so on. So I'll compress that towards the end, but I'll talk about how what kind of data actually exists in India, what kind of efforts have been done to address both of these topics of wildlife conservation versus human-wildlife conflict. So first of all, conservation, it's the need of the hour, and it has been so for a long time. Particularly in the 1990s, when illegal wildlife trade for body parts like tiger bones and so on was at the high, there were lots and lots of poaching incidents which were happening, and it led to the local extinction of tigers in two very important national parks: Sariska, which is in Rajasthan, and Panna, which is in Madhya Pradesh. And Sariska, being just 200 kilometers away from New Delhi, the local extinction really shook the government. And yet, the official number for the official count of tigers in India was about 3,500. So when this was investigated, the CBI had to come in to picture, and they actually realized that there were no tigers in these two national parks. And the government then pushed the Tiger Task Force, which is now the NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, to mandate WII, which is Wildlife Institute of India, the research wing of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, to create a process which was scientific for monitoring the tiger population. And they came up with this 4-phase protocol, which was going to be deployed across the entire country. In the first phase, they take forest guards and lots of volunteers who actually walk across the entire forested area. So in 2014, they walked about 0.4 million miles across 0.5 square million kilometers of the area. In phase 2, there's remote sensing data from satellite imagery and so on, which is incorporated. And then in phase 3, they install cameras, motion-triggered cameras, which are called as camera traps, across the entire country to collect data. And then finally in phase 4, they combine it with SCAT and DNA testing and so on, and use this to get an estimate of the entire population. And they realized that in 2008, when this finally this protocol was followed, it turned out that the actual number was 1,411. So we were off by about 60%, which is a huge error, particularly after an investment of about $400 million for 30 years, for which the Project Tiger had already existed back then. So this basically propagated the use of camera traps, because you had images, so you know that a particular tiger actually was present there. It's accurate, inexpensive, non-invasive, so it's convenient for the tigers, for the scientists. It's safer. So and we have seen a growing trend in terms of the number of camera traps which have been deployed. So about 9,500 in 2014, and this last year about 15,000. Which would eventually lead to about 2 crores of images taken across the entire country. So the way the camera traps are used is that first the tiger images are identified, the flank region is cropped out, It's passed through a software called as extract compare, and then it is actually matched to the instances in the database. And this is a fairly old software which is being used, and it takes a fair amount of time to actually process an image, and it's about takes about 10 to 15 seconds to process one image, which is a huge amount of manual effort done by the biologists at Wildlife Institute of India. So in 2014, about 70% of the tiger individuals were actually captured by camera traps. So while this tiger monitoring population consensus effort happens once in 4 years, and it's a huge effort with a lot of investment from the government, there are still patrolling units which actually move across the forests, and they use a tool called M-Stripes, or Monitoring System for Tiger Intensive Patrolling and Ecological Status, and which has 3 different modules. One is for patrolling, where a forest guard would record different kinds of events. The other is ecological status, if there are any species are identified, or any just general recording of how the species and ecosystem changes, evolves. And then finally the conflict module, which actually can allow people to report conflicts with wildlife. So if you run into a tiger or something or a leopard, then this kind of a module can be used. And so WIA has actually developed this app, which is actually now given to 20 of the state forests, and people are collecting data. So all this data is now going to be digitally available very, very soon. And this has very interesting, it has image data, video, audio. It could have notes written in natural language, and so on. And the vision is that on top of all of this data, there would be machine learning technology which would actually be used for understanding and designing management plans. So apart from patrolling, I mean, even though patrolling is done on foot, there are ways in which this can be augmented, and one way to do this is to use UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles, which is actually already being done at some of the national parks in Uganda. And this image is actually from this organization called Air Shepherd, which collaborates with one of my collaborators at USC. And the idea is that you have a drone which flies around and captures thermal IR images. And there are people sitting in the van who are actually looking at the video and trying to identify whether there are animals or poachers there or not. And this is a really, really challenging task. And the reason is this. These are the kind of frames that this thermal IR cameras actually generate. And manually going through these kind of frames, trying to identify whether there's a human or an animal, is just dizzying to me. So the idea is here that we actually eliminate the need for continuous monitoring. And so the question that is being asked here is that whether computer vision and machine learning techniques can be used to do something like this, where you automatically detect entities which are visible. And if there is one, then you take an appropriate action by calling the rangers and so on. So as the conservation efforts are taking place, the tiger population has steadily increased. Currently, in the last census, it was about 2,200, give or take. And nonetheless, I mean, as human population increases, the habitat, the tiger reserves, the area where the tigers can actually coexist is shrinking. And as the density increases, the tigers actually move out and go into villages. There are cattle killings. I'm sure you must have heard of the Avni scenario, Avni case. So one way to solve this problem is to design what are called as ecological corridors. And the idea is that you have these different national parks which are neighboring, and you identify paths that an animal or a tiger or prey would actually take to move from one national park to the other, one tiger reserve to the other. This is a very challenging problem, and it requires a lot of data in terms of what kind of low resistant paths would exist. And people have actually solved this or tried to solve it to some extent by applying discrete optimization techniques. So that was about conflicts, in just outside at the periphery of tiger reserves. But we also have different kinds of conflicts. So the rhesus macaque, or the everyday monkey that we see, I'm sure you would have heard of incidents with monkeys, if not experienced one as well. So here, this guy has actually he's extorting this person for food by holding on to the phone. He actually, this is just a small clip, but he had actually stolen the phone. And this is still not that aggressive. There are statistics which suggest that there are 1,000 human bites per day, which is a huge problem. And even worse is the amount of crop raiding that these monkeys do. So, and the challenge really here is that the number of people who can actually go and trap these monkeys is really small. So the monkey catchers, the amount of monkey catchers that we have is really small. They're underpaid. They don't want to make that effort too much. So how do we take this small set of resources and apply it optimally, to a growing population of monkeys? So this plot here is from Himachal, which is an interesting case because in 2004 there were 3.17 lakh individuals of monkeys, and 2013 there are only 2.26 lakh. So they have systematically been able to reduce the monkey population by doing a mass sterilization operation, which indeed is difficult because you have to catch it. So here, I don't think you're able to read this, but the point here is that this red bar that you see over here is actually the population, the number of monkeys which exist in urban environments. While everything has gone down, this has substantially increased, which of course leads to conflicts with humans. And the issue there is because of habitat shrinkage, these monkeys have become commensals, or they completely become dependent on humans to provide food. And once they become commensals, it's really hard to actually, even if we try to translocate them, they come back to human environments because whatever would be the nearest neighborhood that has humans, they come back there. And it's difficult for the government to enforce people to not engage with monkeys, to not feed them, and so on. And so the solution that the Himachal Pradesh Forest Department came up with is mass sterilization. Nonetheless, the reporting of incidents, the capturing them is a huge process, which can be mitigated by using some kind of a platform, a crowdsourcing platform where people can report such incidents. And the underlying technology that we really need for that is to identify individuals, which can help identify troops, where they are operating, and so on, and that would help us optimize the resources that we want to put in a particular direction. So along these problems is where we are actually working. So in wildlife monitoring, we are helping Wildlife Institute of India to actually automate part of the process. So currently they are testing a species categorization module that we created for them, which is simply put, it's a faster RCNN operating on the camera trap images. The challenge is, as Professor Sunita talked about calibration, those kind of issues become really important over here. Because you have false alarms which are not expected, or you have misses which are at a very unexpected with very unexpected probabilities. So the other thing that this is ongoing work that we are doing, unique identification of individuals, so particularly for monkey population and for tigers, and we plan to extend that for leopards as well. So the effort that we are doing, so the monkey population is actually, the work is supported by Microsoft AI for Earth. And this is a fairly challenging vision problem. One reason for that is that there's a large number of classes with very few samples per individuals. I just need a couple of more minutes. And there's lots of background clutter, camouflage, lighting conditions, different pose variations, and so on. And what we are doing today is to build representations which are pose invariant, or rather robust to pose. These also bring about very interesting research directions. So for example, open set recognition, the typical population is dynamic. Individuals die and new individuals move into the same space. There are morphological similar species that we need to distinguish between. And we have very imbalanced classes in case of species. There are lots of tiger images, very few water buffalo, and so on. And then very interesting computer vision problems with respect to 3D and developing pose invariant representations. And finally, transfer learning and domain adaptation. We identify monkeys using faces, and we are really good at human faces. How do you transfer that knowledge to identifying primates in general? So lots of opportunities. Once we are past this low-level processing at the image level, these visual summaries can actually assist other high-level AI techniques which actually help the conservation management agencies. Finally, I would like to just acknowledge these are the two gentlemen who are at WII, and it's all their effort over the last 10 years that has led to all this data. And then Professor Tambe and his group at USC, from where we are working on the surveillance problem, and then Dr. Ryan Farrell, who's collaborating with us on individual identification of tigers. And last but certainly not the least, my students, Ankita and Gulal. Thank you.
Are these data available for?
We're working with WIA to release it as a data set. So the surveillance data, we are actually trying to make it public during the next ICCV workshop. So we had organized a workshop on visual wildlife monitoring in ICCV 2017, and we are going to propose one more again next year, this year, in fact. So in the camera trap data, we are talking to WIA if we can actually get it out. I mean, there are sensitivity issues with respect to, particularly with respect to tigers, because if it goes out, then poaching incidents and things like that are. So that's the main concern that NTCA and WIA has. So, for example, the monkey problem is largely India specific. I mean, it was there in the US. They just killed them. So India people, I mean, there are several cultural and religious aspects, you know, to killing with respect to killing monkeys. So that is usually not an acceptable solution. It has happened in the past where a monkey was killed, and there were uproars about why. So in fact, as far as the camera trap data collection is concerned, that India in fact does the largest camera trap setup in the world. I mean, there are other places where this happens, but not at this scale, where there are 15,000 camera traps which are installed, and they're left there for like 45 days each. So India has the largest setup for that.
Saket, you mentioned at the end some research challenges that have come out of this research. So if you can just give an example of one instance where you thought you might just use an available technology like CNN, and how you found out that this data also provides a new challenge that you hadn't thought.
So yeah, so a very recent example. So ECCV 2018 has this paper where a student who in fact did an internship at Microsoft AI for Earth. She collected a data set from camera trap images, and she showed that if you train your model on one particular location and test it on another location, the model is biased, and even if it's the same set of species and so on. So that brings you to the transfer learning kind of a problem. And there are very few papers which actually talk about domain adaptation, for instance, in case of image object detection. I mean, there's a lot of work in domain adaptation in general for classification and for image segmentation, for instance, but not so much on image detection. So that could be one direction where this is. And what we have observed is that there's of course spatial, there's a domain shift because of the spatial differences, but also temporal differences. If you train on data which is taken four years ago, and again now you're training it on current data, testing it on current data, the accuracy goes down.
So with that, we thank Saket again.
Thank you.